Hello everybody, welcome back to another Hot Girl Reads. Honestly, I wish I did this like 20 minutes ago because my curls were way cuter. But it's fine, it is fine. Welcome back to another Hot Girl Reads. It's your girl, Elevated Angel, back at it with another video. And we are almost done with this book, guys. We are literally on the home stretch. I have to go live and be very fast today because I have a very busy day coming up and I will not be able to go live tomorrow. So let's get into it. This is going to be a very, very fast episode. I will be reading at the speed of, I don't know. But yes, okay. If everybody gets their books open to read Mr. What am I trying to say? We're reading 48 Laws of Power by Mr. Robert Greene himself. And like, you know how it is, I'm at work. We are on page 282, Law 34. Let's get into it. Let's go. So this chapter is called Be Royal in Your Own Fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one. So judgment. The way that you carry yourself will often determine how you will be treated. In the long run, appearing vulgar or common will make people disrespect you. For a king respects himself and inspires the same sentiment in others. By acting regally and confident in your powers, you make yourself seem destined to wear a crown. Okay? So let's go ahead and get into the transgression of the law. In July of 1830, a revolution broke out in Paris and forced the King Charles X to abdicate. A commission of the highest authorities in the land gathered to choose a successor, and the man they picked was Louis Philip, the Duke of Orleans. From the beginning, it was clear that Louis Philip would be a different kind of king, and not just because he came from a different branch of the royal family or because he had not inherited the crown, but rather been given it by commission, putting his legitimacy in question. Rather, it was that he disliked ceremony and the trappings of royalty. He had more friends among the bankers than among the nobility, and his style was not to create a new kind of royal rule as Napoleon had done, but to downplay his status, the better to mix the businessmen and middle-class folk who had called him to lead. Thus the symbols that came to be associated with Louis Philip were neither the scepter nor the crown, but the gray hat and umbrella with which he would proudly walk the streets of Paris as if he were the bourgeois out for a stroll. When Louis Philip invited James Rothschild, hi, good morning, the most important banker in France, to his palace, he treated him as an equal. And unlike any king before him, not only did he talk business with Monsieur Rothschild, but that was literally all he talked for. He loved money and had amassed a huge fortune. As the reign of the bourgeois king plodded on and people came to despise him, the aristocracy could not endure the sight of the unkingly king, and within a few years they turned on him. Meanwhile, the growing class of the poor, including the radicals who had chased out Charles X, found no satisfaction in a ruler who neither acted as a king nor governed as a man of the people. The bankers, to whom Louis Philip was the most beholden, soon realized that it was they who controlled the country, not he, and they treated him like a growing contempt. One day, at the start of the train trip organized for the royal family, James Rothschild actually berated him and in public for being late. Once the king had made the news by treating the banker as an equal, now the banker treated the king as an inferior. Eventually, the workers' insurrections that had brought down Louis Philip's predecessor began to reemerge, and the king put them down with force. But what was he defending so brutally? Not the institution of monarchy, which he disdained, nor a democratic republic, which his rule prevented. What he was really defending, it seemed, was his own fortune and the fortune of the bankers, not a way to inspire loyalty among the citizenry. In early 1848, Frenchmen of all classes began to demonstrate for electoral reform that would make the country a truly democratic. By February, the demonstrations had turned violent. To assuage the populace, Louis Philippe fired his prime minister and appointed a liberal as a replacement. But this created the opposite for the desired effect. The people sensed they could push the king around. The demonstrations turned into a full-fledged revolution with gunfire and barricades in the streets. On the night of February 23rd, a crowd of Parisians surrounded the palace. With a suddenness that caught everyone by surprise, Louis Philippe abdicated that very evening and fled to England. He left no successor, nor even the suggestion of one. His whole government folded up and dissolved like a traveling circus leaving town. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and interpret what the freak I just read to you, okay? Louis Philippe consciously dissolved the aura of the that naturally pertains to kings and leaders. Scoffing at the symbolism of grandeur, he believed a new world was dawning where rulers should act and be like ordinary citizens, and he was right. A new world without kings and queens that's certainly on its way. He was profoundly wrong, however, in predicting a change in dynamics of power. The bourgeois king's hat and umbrella amused the French at first, but soon it grew irritating. People knew that Louis Philippe was not really like them at all, and that the hat and umbrella were essentially a kind of trick to encourage them in the fantasy that the country had suddenly grown more equal. Actually, though, the divisions of wealth had never been greater. The French expected the ruler to be a bit of a showman, to have some presence. Even a radical like Robespierre, who had briefly come to power during the French Revolution 50 years earlier, had understood this. And certainly Napoleon, who had turned the revolutionary republic into an imperial regime, had known it in its bones. Indeed, as soon as Louis Philippe fled the stage, the French revealed their true desire. They elected Napoleon's grandnephew president. He was virtual unknown, but they had hoped that he would recreate the great general's powerful aura, erasing the awkward memory of the bourgeois king. Powerful people may be tempted to affect a common man aura, trying to create the illusion that they and their subjects or underlinings are basically the same. But the people whom this false gesture is intended to impress will quickly see through it. They understand that they are not being given more power, but that it only appears as if they shared the powerful person's fate. The only kind of common touch that works in this kind of is the kind affected by Franklin Roosevelt, a style that is said that the president shared values and goals with the common people, even while he remained a patrician at heart. He never pretended to erase his distance from the crowd. Leaders who try to dissolve the distance through false chumminess gradually lose the ability to inspire loyalty, fear, or love. Instead, they elicit contempt. Like Louis Philippe, they are too uninspiring even to be worth a guillotine. The best they can simply do is vanish in the night as if they were never there. Interesting. Interessante. So let's go ahead and read a little red blurb by my man Baltasar Gracian. Never lose your self-respect, nor be too familiar with yourself when you are alone. Let your integrity itself be your own standard of rectitude, and be more indebted to the severity of your own judgment of yourself than to all external precepts. Desist from unseemly conduct, rather out of respect for your own virtue than for the strictures of external authority. Come to hold yourself in awe, and you will have no need of Seneca's imaginary tutor. Baltasar Gracian, 1601 to 1658. So, oh my God. Honestly, I might put my hair in a bun today. I don't know. This humidity, literally messed up my hair. It looked really cute when I first got to work, though. Okay, so observance of the law. When Christopher Columbus was trying to find funding for his legendary voyages, many around him believed that he came from Italian aristocracy. This view was passed into history through a biography written after the explorer's death by his son, which describes him as a descendant of Count Colombo of the castle of Caccaro in Montferrat. I don't speak Italian. Colombo, in turn, was said to be descended from the legendary Roman generals Colonius, and two of his first cousins were supposedly direct descendants of an emperor of Constantinople. An illustrious background indeed, but it was nothing more than illustrious fantasy, for Columbus was actually the son of Domenico Colombo, a humble weaver who had opened a wine shop when Christopher was a young man, and who then made his living by selling cheese. Columbus himself had created the myth of his noble background because from early on he felt that destiny had singled him out for great things and that he had a kind of royalty in his blood. Accordingly, he acted as if he were indeed descended from noble stock. After an uneventful career as a merchant on a commercial vessel, Columbus, originally from Genoa, settled in Lisbon. Using a fabricated story of his noble background, he married into an established Lisbon family that had excellent connections with the Portuguese royalty. Through his in-laws, Columbus finagled a meeting with the King of Portugal, João II, whom he petitioned to finance a westward voyage aimed at discovering a shorter route to Asia, in return for announcing that any discoveries he achieved would be made in the king's name. Columbus wanted a series of rights: the title Grand Admiral of the Oceanic Sea, the office of the Viceroy over any lands he found, and 10% of the future commerce with such lands. All of these rights were to be hereditary, and for all time Columbus made these demands, even though he had previously been a mere merchant. He knew almost nothing about navigation. He could not work a quadrant, and he had never led a group of men. In short, he had absolutely no qualifications for the journey he proposed. Furthermore, his petition included no details as to how he would accomplish his plans, just vague promises. When Columbus finished his pitch, João II smiled. He politely declined the offer, but left the door open for the future. Here Columbus must have noticed something he would never forget. Even as the king turned down the sailors' demands, he treated them as legitimate. He neither laughed at Columbus nor questioned his background and credentials. In fact, the king was impressed by the boldness of Columbus' request and clearly felt comfortable in the company of a man who acted so confidently. The meeting must have convinced Columbus that his instincts were correct. By asking for the moon, he had instantly raised his own status for the king, assumed that unless a man who had set the price a high price on himself were mad, which Columbus did not appear to be, he must somehow be worth it. A few years later, Columbus moved to Spain. Using his Portuguese connections, he moved in elevated circles at the Spanish court, receiving subsidies from illustrious financiers and sharing tables with dukes and princes. To all these men, he repeated his request for financing for a voyage to the west and also for the rights he had demanded from João II. Some of the most powerful Duke of Medina wanted to help but could not, since they lacked the power to grant him the titles and rights he wanted, but Columbus would not back down. He soon realized that the only person could meet his demands, Queen Isabella. In 1487, he finally managed a meeting with the queen, and although he could not convince her to finance the voyage, he completely charmed her and became a frequent guest in the palace. In 1492, Spanish finally expelled the Moorish invaders who centuries earlier had seized parts of its country. With the wartime burden on their treasury lifted, Isabella felt she could finally respond to the demands of her explorer friend, and she decided to pay for 3 ships, equipment and salaries of the crew, and a modest stipend for Columbus. More important, she had a contract drawn up that granted Columbus the titles and rights on which he had insisted. The only one she denied, and only in contract's fine print, was 10% of all revenues from any land discovered, an absurd demand. Since he wanted no time limit on it, he had the clause been in he had the clause been left in, it would eventually have made Columbus and his heirs the wealthiest family on the planet. Columbus never read the fine print. Satisfied by his demands, sorry, satisfied by his demands, Satisfied that his demands had been met, Columbus set sail that same year in search of the passage to Asia. Before he left, he was careful to hire the best navigator he could find to help him get there. The mission failed to find such a passage. Yet when Columbus petitioned the Queen to finance an even more ambitious voyage the following year, she agreed. By then, she had come to see Columbus as destined for great things. Oh, that was such a cute story. Even though I don't really F with Columbus, like Christopher Columbus, that was such a cute story, guys. Interpretation. As an explorer, Columbus was mediocre at best. He knew less things about the sea than the average sailor on the ships, could never determine the latitude and longitude of his discoveries, mistook islands for vast continents, and treated his crew badly. But in one area, he was a genius. He knew how to sell himself. How else to explain this? How the son of a cheese vendor and a low-level merchant managed to integrate himself with the highest royal and aristocratic families? Columbus had an amazing power to charm the nobility, and it all came from the way he carried himself. He projected a sense of confidence that was completely out of proportion to his means, nor was his confidence the aggressive, ugly self-promotion of an upstart. It was quiet and calm self-assurance. In fact, the same confidence usually shown by nobility themselves. The powerful in the old-style aristocracies felt no need to prove or assert themselves. Being noble, they knew they always deserved more and asked for it. With Columbus, then they felt an instant affinity, and he carried himself just the way they did, elevated above the crowd, destined for greatness. Understand, it is within your power to set your own price. How you carry yourself reflects what you think of yourself. If you ask for little, shuffle your feet, and lower your head, people will assume this reflects your character. But this behavior is not you. It is only how you have chosen to present yourself to other people. You can just as easily present the Columbus front, buoyancy, confidence, and the feeling that you were born to wear a crown. Aw, that was such a cute story, guys. So let's read this quote. With all great deceivers, there is a noteworthy occurrence to which they owe their power. It is the actual act of deception that they overcome by belief in themselves. It is this which then speaks so miraculously and compellingly to those around them. Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. So let's go ahead and read this little red blurb. Hippocleides at Sicyon. In the next generation, the family became much more famous than before through the distinction conferred upon the Cleisthenes, the master of Sicyon. Cleisthenes had a daughter, Agarista, whom he wished to marry to the best man in all of Greece. So during the Olympic Games, in which he had himself won the chariot race, he had a public announcement made to the effect that any Greek who thought himself good enough to become Cleisthenes' son-in-law should present himself in Sicyon within 60 days, or sooner if he wished, because he intended within the year following the 60th day to betroth his daughter to her future husband. Cleisthenes had a racetrack and a wrestling ring specially made for this purpose, and presently the suitors began to arrive, every man of Greek nationality who had something to be proud of either in his country or in himself. Cleisthenes began by asking each of the numerous suitors in turn to name his country and parentage. Then he kept them in his house for a year, to get to know them well, entering into a conversation with them, sometimes singly, sometimes all together, and testing each of them for his manly qualities and temper, education, and manners. But the most important test of all was their behavior at the dinner table. All this went on throughout their stay in Sikyon, and all the time he had entertained them handsomely. For one reason or another, there was two Athenians who impressed Cleisthenes most favorably, and the two Tisander's son Hippocleides came to be preferred. At last the day came which had been fixed for the betrothal of the Cleisthenes had to declare his choice. He marked the day by the sacrifice of 100 oxen. Oh my God. And then gave a great banquet to which not only the suitors but everyone of the note in the Sikyon was invited. When dinner was over, the suitors began to compete with each other in music and in talking in company in both accomplishments. It was Hippocleides who proved to be the far doughtiest champion until at last, as more and more wine was drunk, he asked the flute player to play him a tune and began to dance to it. Now it may well be that he danced to his own satisfaction. Cleisthenes, however, who was watching the performance, began to have serious doubts about the whole business. Presently, after a brief pause, Hippocleides sent a table, and the table was brought, and Hippocleides, climbing to it, danced first some Lanconian dances, next some Attic ones, and it ended by standing on his head and beating in time with his legs in the air. OMG. The Lanconian and Attic dances were bad enough, but Cleisthenes, though he had already loathed the thought of having a son-in-law like that, nevertheless restrained himself and managed to avoid an outburst. But when he saw Hippocleides beating time with his legs, he could bear it no longer. "Son of Tisander," he cried, "you have danced away your marriage." The Histories of Herodotus, 5th century BC. That was a very interesting little blurb. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and read the keys to power. And yeah, guys, this chapter is really short. Okay, as children, we start our lives with great exuberance, expecting and demanding everything from the world. This generally carries on into our first forays into societies as we begin our careers. But as we grow older, the rebuffs and failures we experience set up boundaries that only get firmer with time. Coming to expect less from the world, we accept limitations and are really self-imposed. We start to bow and scrape and apologize for even the simplest of requests. The solution to such a shrinking of horizons is to deliberately force ourselves into the opposite direction, to downplay the failures and ignore the limitations, to make ourselves demand and expect as much as the child. To accomplish this, we must use the particular strategy upon ourselves. Call it the strategy of the crown. The strategy of the crown is based on the simple chain of cause and effect. If we believed we are destined for great things, our belief will radiate outwards, just as the crown creates an aura around the king. This outward radiance will infect the people around us, who will think we must have reasons to feel so confident. People who wear the crown seem to feel no inner sense of the limits to what they can ask for or what they can accomplish. This too radiates outward. Limits are and boundaries disappear. Use the strategy of the crown and you will be surprised how often it bears fruit. Take this example, those happy children who ask for whatever they want and get it. Their high expectations are their charm. Adults enjoy granting their wishes just as Isabella enjoyed granting the wishes of Columbus. Throughout history, people of undistinguished birth, the Theodoras of Byzantine and the Columbuses, the Beethovens, the Disraelis, have managed to work the strategy of the crown, believing so firmly in their own greatness that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The trick is simple. Be overcome by your self-belief. Even while you know you are practicing a kind of deception on yourself, act like a king. You are likely to be treated as one. The crown may be separate from you the crown may separate you from other people, but it is you to make the separation real. You have to act differently, demonstrating your distance from those around you. One way to emphasize your difference is to always act with dignity no matter the circumstance. Louis Philippe gave no sense of being different than from the other people. He was a banker king, and the moment his subjects threatened him, he caved in. Everyone sensed this and pounced. Lacking regal dignity and firmness of purpose, Louis Philippe seemed like an impostor, and the crown was easily toppled from his head. Regal bearing should not be confused with arrogance. Arrogance may seem the king's entitlement, but in fact it betrays insecurity. It is the very opposite of a royal demeanor. Haile Selassie, ruler of Ethiopia for 40 or so years, beginning in 1930, was once a young man named Lige Tafari. He came from a noble family, but there was no real chance of him coming to power, for he was far down the line of succession from the king to the throne. Menelik II, nevertheless, from an early age, he exhibited a self-confidence and a royal bearing that surprised everyone around him. At the age of 14, Tafari went to live at court, where he immediately impressed Menelik and became his favorite. Tafari's grace under fire, his patience, and his calm self-assurance fascinated the king. The other young nobles, arrogant, blustery, and envious, would push this slight, bookish teenager around, but he never got angry. That he would have been a sign of insecurity, to which he would not stoop. There was already people around him who felt would someday rise to the top, for he acted as if he was already there. Years later, in 1936, when the Italian fascists had taken over Ethiopia and Tafari, now called Haile Selassie, was in exile, he addressed the League of Nations to plead his country's case. The Italians in the audience heckled him with vulgar abuse, but he maintained his dignified pose as if completely unaffected. This elevated him while making his opponents look even uglier. Dignity, in fact, is invariably the mask to assume under difficult circumstances. It is as if nothing can affect you, and you can have all the time in the world to respond. This is extremely powerful pose. A royal demeanor has other uses. Con artists have long known the value of the aristocratic front. It either disarms people and makes them less suspicious, or else it intimidates them and puts them on the defensive. And as Count Victor Lustig knew, once you put a sucker on the defensive, he is doomed. The con man, Yellow Kid Wheel, too, would often assume the trappings of a man's wealth, along with the nonchalance that goes with them. Alluding to some kind of magical method of making money, he would stand aloof, like a king, exuding confidence as if he were really fabulously rich. The suckers would beg to be in on the con or have a chance with the wealth that he so clearly displayed. Finally, to reinforce the inner psychological tricks involved in projecting a royal demeanor, there are outward strategies to help you create the effect. First, the Columbus strategy. Always make a bold demand. Set your price high and do not waver. Second, in a dignified way, go after the highest person in the building. This immediately puts you on the same plane as the chief executive you are attacking. It is the David and Goliath strategy. By choosing a great opponent, you create the appearance of greatness. Third, give a gift of some sort to those above you. This is a strategy to those who have a patron. By giving your patron a gift, you are essentially saying that the two of you are equal. In the old con game of giving so that you can take, when the Renaissance writer Pietro Aretino wanted the Duke of Mantua as his next patron, he knew that if he was slavish and sycophantic, the Duke would think him unworthy. So he approached the Duke with gifts, in this case, painting by the writer's good friend Titian. Accepting the gifts created a kind of equality between the Duke and the writer. The Duke was put at ease by the feeling that he was dealing with a man of his own aristocratic stamp. He funded Aretino generously, and the gift strategy is subtle and brilliant because you do not beg. You ask for help in a dignified way that implies equality between the two people, one of whom just so happens to have more money. Remember, it is up to you to set your own price. Ask for less, and it is what you will get. Ask for more, however, and you send the signal that you are worth the king's ransom. Even those who turn you down respect you for your confidence, and the respect will eventually pay off in a way you cannot imagine. I honestly love this chapter. This might be my favorite chapter. So, guys, close your eyes and imagine this, unless you're driving or handling heavy machinery. The crown placed upon your head, and you assume a different pose, tranquil, yet radiating assurance. Never show doubt. Never lose your dignity beneath the crown, or it will fall, or it will not fit. It will seem to be destined for one more worthy. Do not wait for a coronation. The greatest emperors crown themselves. I love that. Authority. Everyone should be a royal after his own fashion. Let all your actions, even though they are not those of a king, be in their own sphere worthy of one. Be sublime in your deeds, lofty in your thoughts, and in all your doing show that you deserve to be a king, even though you are not one in reality. Baltasar Gracian, 1601 to 1658. Now, this is a reversal to the law if what I just read is not applicable to you. The idea behind the assumption of regal confidence is to set yourself apart from other people. But if you take this too far, it will be your undoing. Never make the mistake of thinking that you elevate yourself by humiliating people. Also, it is never a good idea to loom too high above the crowd. You make an easy target. There are times when the aristocratic pose is eminently dangerous. Charles I, King of England during the 1640s, faced a profound public disenchantment with the institution of monarchy. Revolts erupted throughout the country, led by Oliver Cromwell. Had Charles reacted to the times with insight, supporting reforms, and making a show of sacrificing some of his power, history might have been more different. Instead, he reverted to an even more regal pose, seeming outraged by the assault on the power in the divine institution of monarchy. His stiff kingliness offended people and spurred on their revolts, and eventually Charles lost his head literally. Understand, you are radiating confidence, not arrogance or disdain. Finally, it is true that you can sometimes find some power through affecting a kind of earth vulgarity, which will prove assuming by its extremeness, but to the extent that you win this game by going beyond the limits, separating yourself from other people by appearing even more vulgar than they are, the game is dangerous. There will always be people more vulgar than you, and you will easily be replaced by following a season by someone younger and worse. Okay, guys, well, that was that, and thanks for watching. Bye.